I've become very self-conscious of the way I look when I've started the stream, but I haven't quite started yet. I find that I always look like dead behind the eyes. So now I've become self-conscious about it, but just going to wait a couple minutes. We will start at 6:30. I should really get one of those starting soon screens. I always tell myself I'm going to make one. And I have it all set up and sourced out on my OBS software to do it, but I just never commit to the bit. But today I did make slides for folks who are want a visual with what they're hearing. I did do that today. Didn't make a lot because it wasn't necessary for what we're talking about today, because what we're talking about today is not very statistical or very visual oriented necessarily, but I thought it would be nice. So I made some visuals. Okay, it's 6:30 where I am. It's something 30 where you are. Let's get started. Hello, everybody. Good evening. Happy first day of December. My name is Grace. I'm a digital organizer here at the Redress Movement. This is the Recon, also known as the Redress Conversation, where I talk about things related to housing justice work, related to organizing, and just other things that I think warrant talking about it that are related to those topics. If you like the work that we're doing, or you want to follow us, our Twitter handle is here, our Instagram handle is here, and you can email us here if you want to talk to, get more involved in the work that we're doing, or talk to myself or one of the other digital organizers. You can reach us at that email. You can also go onto our website and sign up for our email list. All that information, as always, is not in the description of this live stream, but if you're watching this on YouTube after the fact, all of that information is in the description box. I do this stream every other Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you are watching this post December 1st, you can tune in live. We would love to have you. And if you're watching this live, hello. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining me. I get very lonely when I'm left by myself. Fortunately, though, I was gifted by God with the ability to talk to an empty room for about 30 minutes without being stopped. So that's what we're here to do today. Anyway, so as always, I have a check-in question for you, and today it is seasonally themed, and it is, what is your favorite winter or holiday movie? If you saw the title, which I'm sure you did, you will understand kind of why this is the question. A favorite holiday movie in my household is always Elf. That's the first one that comes to mind, or it's Home Alone 1 or 2, but Elf, my family just really has a soft spot for Elf. We watched it over the day after Thanksgiving, or 2 days after Thanksgiving, we watched it together because we were like, 'tis the season, let's watch Elf. And I remember my mother asked me, do we have a streaming service that has Elf on it? I was like, yeah, don't you remember? Last year, we decided to just buy Elf on Amazon Prime. Because let me turn down my volume a little bit. For years, we had the DVD. Not that we ever watched it, but we had the DVD, and we could find somewhere to rent it if we were using streaming services, but we finally just bought it. And we said, well, we watch this every year, multiple times a year, so we might as well just own it. So she was like, oh my God, yeah. So and sure enough, we went and looked it up, and I was like, yep, we own it. That's cool. So please, if you're watching this live, you can drop it in the chat. I think we only have one cute viewer. Hello, viewer. And if you're watching this after the fact, you can always leave it in the comment section. I want to read about your favorite winter. And I think a lot of things could fall under a winter movie. It doesn't have to be specific to a holiday, but if it just takes place in the winter. What's that movie that they talk about in this, not horrible, but in this Netflix Christmas movie, Love Hard? They, Braveheart, they're is a Christmas movie, which is okay, maybe it's a winter movie, Anyway, so speaking of winter movies, So we did a lot, it was the holidays. I hope everybody enjoyed their holiday time. And was able to take some restful time off. So as I said, I was home, I was staying with my parents for the holiday weekend. And one of the things we did was we watched a lot of classic holiday movies because, Thanksgiving's over. So it's officially Christmas and just everybody decides that. And so we were watching holiday movies. And in addition to Elf, my mother's favorite Christmas movie is It's a Wonderful Life. And I had never seen It's a Wonderful Life. I vaguely knew what it was about, but I had no idea. I'd never seen it. I'd never watched it beginning to end. And we really didn't even sit down to watch it. It's just that in the process, like I saw that she was watching it. And I was like, oh, or yeah, we were flipping to the TV and we saw it had just started. It was like 30 minutes in. So, I knew some general things about it. Like, I knew some quotes from it, but I didn't have any clue what it was about. I just knew that I was probably going to cry. So, tell me why, 30 minutes into this movie, I'm having to sit there and ask my mother, what year did this movie come out? Because it's in black and white. But some of the things I'm hearing them say are wow. First of all, there was a little bit of, profanity that made me laugh. Because I was like, that's, kind of vulgar even for me, and I'm a Gen Zer, and I grew up on the internet, and I'm a little bit wow, they just filmed that and put that in a movie? In the 40s? But more so things about actually, housing, and I was like, wow, this is insane. So I had to keep telling my mom, when was this movie made? Check when this movie was made. So anyway, so that's what I wanted to talk about today, because I thought it presented us with an interesting opportunity to talk about it in its context, and then also kind of bring it a little bit into the now, and also just get into a festive holiday spirit. No, I did not decorate the box that I live in on the internet with Christmas lights. I did think about it, but maybe when we get closer. It's still a tiny bit too early for me to justify decorating this box in any kind of way. I don't even have my own Christmas decorations up, mostly because they haven't arrived to my house yet, okay? I didn't decorate last year, I guess. Boo me. That's boring. I didn't decorate for Christmas. Boo. Yeah, I didn't decorate last year at all because I was like, well, I'm not going to be here. So but this year I'm like, nah, I want to decorate. I'm not going to get a tree. Anyway, I've really gone off on a tangent here, but we're going to be talking about It's a Wonderful Life. Again, your check-in cue was, what is your favorite holiday movie? If It's a Wonderful Life, I'm so happy. But if you haven't ever watched it, first I'm going to give you a little bit of context, a little bit of backstory. But to do that, I will have to switch my setup a little bit here. So bear with me while it's not, I understand that I'm a digital native and I'm supposed to understand how everything works in terms of tech, organically, but I just don't. And so I do run up against my problems. So please just forgive me and bear with me. Okay, you can see that? Wow, that actually looks better now than it did before. I don't know why, and I'm not questioning it. So yeah, this is It's a Wonderful Life. So It's a Wonderful Life is a 1946 American Christmas fantasy drama film produced and directed by Frank Capra. You can see this is a beautiful scene here. It follows our main guy is the guy over here who's surrounded by all these children. The tallest guy, he's George Bailey. And it basically follows him throughout his life, starting with when he was a kid and moving all the way through to when he was an adult. The bulk of the movie takes place between 1928 and 1945. Let me just switch over here. Yeah, so it follows him from 1928 to 1945. That's when the bulk of the movie takes place. And then when his father suddenly dies, George has to forego all of his plans for his future and take over the family business, which is the Bailey Brothers Building and Loan. So it was run by his father and his brother, Uncle Billy, the father's brother, Uncle Billy. George also has a brother. This is a chaotic explanation of this movie. So the Bailey Brothers Building and Loan is a building and loan association, which is also known as a thrift institution, but it's basically a financial institution that specializes in accepting savings deposits and making mortgages and other loans. Your main antagonist is a Mr. Henry F. Potter, so it's this evil looking guy over here. And he controls most of the town, and he wants to dissolve the building and loan. But the board that is part of the building and loan is like, no, we have to keep it open, but only if George runs it. And so then George is like, okay, I won't go to Europe. I won't go to college. I will stay here. I will run the building and loan. But when my brother graduates from college, his younger brother, he gives all his money to go to college to his brother so his brother can go to college. And then his brother goes to college, and he's like, when he comes back, he'll run the building and loan. Well, when his brother comes back, then he's been married. And so he's like, no. And then there's the war. And so then the brother gets drafted. But George can't get drafted because he's deaf in his left ear because of an accident when he was a child. So now it's left to George to run the building and loan. And the building and loan is not exactly like a money-making thing. They weren't made to be, profiting institutions. They were just there to provide mortgages for lower income folks. But people like Potter, who are all about turning in profit, are like, why are you doing this, right? So that's why he wants to get rid of it. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what the building and loan was. But I want to just play this clip for you of that this was the clip I watched in the movie. I said, hang on, what year is this movie from? Okay, give me more context. So let me just switch back really quickly. No. There we go. Forgive me for not being always the most tech savvy. Okay, I'm going to turn off my mic, and then I'm going to turn the other mic on. So please just enjoy this clip.
Money. What does that get us? A discontented, lazy rabble instead of a thrifty working class. And all because a few
Sorry, I'm going to start this over just so I can put the closed captions on.
Money. What does that get us? A discontented, lazy rabble instead of a thrifty working class. And all because a few starry-eyed dreamers like Peter Bailey stir them up and fill their head with a lot of impossible ideas. Now, I say...
Just a minute. Now, hold on. Just a minute. Now, you're right when you say my father was no businessman. I know that. Why he ever started this cheap penny-ante building and loan, I'll never know. But neither you nor anybody else can say anything against his character because his whole life was... Why, in the 25 years since he and Uncle Billy started this thing, he never once thought of himself. Isn't that right, Uncle Billy? He didn't save enough money to send Harry to school, let alone me. But he did help a few people get out of your slums, Mr. Potter. And what's wrong with that? Well, here, you're all businessmen here. Doesn't it make them better citizens? Doesn't it make them better customers? You said that what'd you say just a minute ago? They had to wait and save their money before they even thought of a decent home? Wait for what? Until their children grow up and leave them? Until they're so old and broken down that you know how long it takes a working man to save $5,000? Just remember this, Mr. Potter, that this rabble you're talking about, they do most of the working and paying and living and dying in this community. Well, is it too much to have them work and pay and live and die in a couple of decent rooms and a bath? Anyway, my father didn't think so. People were human beings to him, but to you, a warped, frustrated old man, they're cattle. Well, in my book, he died a much richer man than you'll ever be.
I'm not interested in your book. I'm talking about the building and loan.
I know very well what you're talking about. You're talking about something you can't get your fingers on, and it's galling you. That's what you're talking about. I know. Well, I've said too much. You're the board here. You do what you want with this thing. There's just one thing more, though. This town needs this measly one-horse institution, if only to have some place where people can come without crawling to Potter. Come on.
Sorry, I hope that didn't get too messed up when I was trying to switch back to my presentation really quickly. Let's close that. Boom. Yeah, isn't that wild? Are you kidding me? Like that scene is crazy. That scene is so crazy to me. There's so much about. First of all, most of the rabble you're talking about is the majority of the people who do the living and working and like whatever it is. It's like the working, the living, and the dying in this town was like wow. And so yeah, the other thing is that Potter has basically bought up most of the town, right? And so for just before that scene, you hear them talking about how there was this one guy who had applied for a loan for $5,000, and it was to build his own home. And there's this whole now park in Bedford Falls, I think is where the movie takes place, that is buildings that have been built by the building and loan where people are now living. And so I was like fascinated by this because I didn't even know what a building and loan was. But I was like, I don't know, but this sounds like something that would be intriguing to me and something like I would want to know more about. So, okay, like let's talk a little bit more about building and loans. I have this slide up here that's kind of going to go over some of my main points. So building and loan associations were organizations that provided loans to members of the association for buying homes. So basically what would happen is the organization would be formed by a community of usually lower income folks, and they made regular payments into the fund. So members also, therefore, owned shares in the organization, and therefore they had the rights to a loan at some point in time or dividends on those shares. So if you can imagine it this way, so you could get you would basically buy into this building and loan, or you'd get a loan through a building and loan. And so you would get the money and then you would pay back into that fund. But that money was then used to fund other building projects. So this comes to a head in this movie at one point when there's there's a run on the banks. And so people flood to the building and loan and they all want to pull out their money. And George has to tell them, your money's not here. It's not here physically. It's in other people's houses. It's been used for other people's houses. So like, I forget what he says, but like one guy is like, I want my money. I have like, whatever it is, like $200 in this building and loan, and I want it. And he's like, I can't give it to you because it's in so-and-so's house. Like he used that money to build that house. So it's not in the bank anymore. And then Potter swoops in and he's like, I will buy your shares in the building and loan, like for half of whatever the stock market value is. So people, therefore, just to get something out of their money, were like, sure, I'll sell it. But then George ends up talking to them, which was, again, like a fascinating moment. I was like, when was this movie made? He starts talking to all the people and he's like, listen, this is how much money we have in the bank right now. What do you need to get by? Like, not take out everything you have, but just what do you need to get by? And people were willing to say, like, you know what? I just need $10, or I just need $5. I just need $7.25. Like, they give much smaller amounts than taking out all their money. And so at the end of it, he's left with like $2, but that's enough to justify like the building and loan can stay open because they still have some cash resources. So these building and loan shares, the shares themselves were often very popular with investors, like people like Potter, because that was my thing. I was like, why does Potter like care about this? Like, how did he get involved in this? But they were really popular with them because they paid higher interest rates than banks. So it was good to have shares in them. So let me readjust here. The kind of like fatal flaw came, or like the flaw of building and loans became more prominent during the Great Depression, which is like not surprising. And most of them did not survive. Like, right at the end of this movie, I was reading some articles about this movie and the history of building and loans. And basically, like, when this movie ends, like, building and loans were pretty much already gone by that point. And they're like, if George Bailey's building and loan was real, it is unlikely that it survived, like, the next couple of years. I'm just, like, catching up a little bit on my own thing. So I was really like, I was interested in using this example about this movie because this is like not, I don't want to say it's not the point of this movie, but it's a very, it's fascinating to me that this building and loan was used as a metaphor because like throughout the movie, it's an interesting device because like in the beginning of the movie, really the references to it are that it's like broke, that it's literally like not worth anything, and that it is, and that like you have the run on the bank. So like there's all these people like, I just want to get out of it. Just give me my money. I just want to get out of it. I want to sell my shares. Give it back. I just want to get out. So you really don't see a lot of that, like the benefit of it. Like I feel like the there's not a lot of, maybe just because they were more popular at that time, so people had this frame of reference. But as me watching it, it was almost interesting how little they showed the benefits to communities, but it is emphasized a few times. So like that speech I showed you was one of them, where he was like, do you know how long it takes a working class person to save up $5,000 and wait for what? For their children to grow up? They should just have dignified housing. But then also, it's interesting that it's used as a device in the end. I am going to spoil the end of this movie for you. This movie came out. What? 70 years ago? If you haven't watched the end of It's a Wonderful Life, I suggest you click off now, go watch it, and come back, because I am going to spoil it. But anyway, so I am going to spoil it. So, but then in the end, it's actually, you actually see kind of like the benefits of it, which is that when the building and loan loses money because Uncle Billy just misplaces it, like it's $8,000, and he literally just accidentally loses the envelope, and Potter gets it because Potter's a jerk. But George basically becomes like a wreck emotionally. His mental health severely declines, and he doesn't know what to do because he has to go to Potter to bail out the building and loan. And Potter is like, you're misallocating funds and losing $8,000. You're going to go to jail, and threatens him. And so he basically is like at the end of his rope. And then they go through this whole thing of like, what would have happened if you were never born though? And so then at the very end of the movie, when he's found like a reason to live again, and he's like very hopeful, even though it's still all the odds are against him, his wife, who I have not mentioned at all, but Mary, iconic Mary, has gone to the whole town and asked them to help like fund the building and loan with $8,000, and everybody shows up at his house on Christmas and chips in money to help, because and all of them are like, you've been there for us, let us be there for you. And it's just a beautiful moment, and it's lovely, and it does make you cry. You will cry. You will maybe ugly cry. I should have inserted the picture of me ugly crying. Let me see if I can show it to you, because I did take a picture of me ugly crying. Look at this. Look at how pathetic this is. Look at how bad this is. Wait, I took another one. I took these for context to send to my mom, to be like, watching It's a Wonderful Life. So it's beautiful to see that like community building, and to see like, and that was actually more, it's not what happened, but I want to just say it's more emblematic of the experience, it seems like. So I'm going to get into that a little bit more. So as I said, a lot of problems came, like a lot of the holes or the problems with building and loans became apparent during the Great Depression. I didn't even go into this. What am I doing? So yeah, there's a lot of the pros for building and loans were that they provided loans to members for buying homes. They formed, I already said this, and the members owned shares, so they were part owners in that organization. Okay, I did say it. Good for me. The fatal flaw came during the Great Depression. As housing prices fell and foreclosures increased, the value of building and loan shares came under a lot of pressure. And if the value of your shares fell, it could take you years longer to pay off your mortgage. It's kind of convoluted, that whole system, and so I'm not going to be able to explain it really well. The other problem during the Great Depression was that investors like Potter really just wanted to get their money out of building and loans as soon as possible. And so did often people, right? So did often the people who actually had loans and shares in it. So that's exactly what happens. They were like in the movie, there's a run on the building and loan, but there actually wasn't, that actually isn't too accurate to what a lot of times it was actually the exact opposite during the Depression, especially. So people with mortgages, so investors would still want to get out because they're like, fuck it, get my money out of here. But people with mortgages of the building loans did not want anyone to take their money out or to do anything that would cause the value of their shares to fall, because again, that would increase their mortgages. So since building and loans were cooperatives where every shareholder had one vote no matter how many shares you owned, So like read as like you had the same number of shares as Potter. The building and loan shareholders often voted that no one could take out any money, and they would freeze withdrawals. But that was usually like a unanimous decision. Like in the movie, like Uncle Billy is like, we have to freeze withdrawals, and George is like, we can't do that, or Potter's gonna flip out. So we have to let people take it out, but let's just convince them not to take as much money. But usually people were like, they didn't want to run on the bank because it would only hurt their own mortgages. So they would often all agree together, and everybody was going to work cooperatively to not take out any money. Funny enough, though, building and loans were actually really good in that they made house prices fall less during the Great Depression than they would have otherwise. So bear with me, this is a little convoluted. So during the Depression, when homeowners stopped making payments, if they were a part of a building and loan, the building and loan would eventually foreclose, but they were member-owned cooperatives, so they were generally very slow to foreclose. But more importantly, the many building and loans would not resell the houses they foreclosed on because the house prices had fallen so much. So if they sold a house, if they were to do that, if they foreclosed a house and then sold it, they would have to book a loss, and that would have lowered the value of all of building and loans shares. So they didn't want to do that. So instead, for years, they would just rent out those foreclosed houses they owned to avoid driving down their share prices, which also meant that they ended up owning a ton of houses. But at the same time, keeping all those previously foreclosed houses off the market lowered the numbers of distressed home sales and prevented U.S. housing prices from falling even more than they did during the Great Depression. So essentially, because building and loan homeowners would have their homes foreclosed on, but that they didn't re-enter the market, and then they would just be rented and owned by the building and loan, that helped not decrease the housing prices more during the Great Depression. Isn't that fascinating to anybody else? And this is all just a subplot in this movie. Like, it's not, it's one of those things where it's like, it is a big part of this movie, but it felt like a subplot. I've never heard anybody talking about the It's a Wonderful Life in this manner with this emphasis. So that was I was like, wow, this is fascinating. I kept being distracted by so how does this work? And I'm sitting there asking my mother, how does a building and loan work? She's like, Grace, I do not know. And I was like, why don't you know these things? This is your favorite movie. She's like, it's never been the thing I focused on in this movie, Grace. It's about wishing you were never born, and if a bell rings, an angel gets its wings. I'm like, but it's a cooperative. Anyway, so with that, I'm going to take a quick little culture break for the culture, and I'm going to show you something funny that I made that I think is hilarious. So here we go. Here we have it. I posted this today on Twitter and on our Instagram story. When I go back to my square, you can see our Instagram and our Twitter handles. But basically, I did a Spotify Wrapped meme. It's not even really a meme. It started as a joke, and now it's very much not a joke. As I made it, I was like, nah, this is for real my organizing rap. So you can see over on the right, this was about the genres you listen to. So I did your top issue areas are, and then on the left, this is our organizational rap, and so it's got our organizers. I tried to pick the ones I felt like most people knew, so I did not include myself. Embarrassing. And then on the right hand side of that, you have our top hits, so some of the work that we've been doing. The Recon is featured here. Let's go, number 3. So yeah, this is just a kooky little thing. And then obviously minutes organizing, 525,600 minutes, which is a bit unrealistic, but I felt it captured a spirit. And then your priority, justice. I was really cracking up at myself when I made this. When I had this idea, I don't really talk about my meme creation process on here, but it is an in-depth process. And, it does take, there's some real creative juice that goes into these processes, and I often spend a lot of time just giggling to myself when I'm making a meme. It's they come to me fully formed. Oh, you know what I should make? this, and then I make it, and it's done. Like, it's not often I sit down and I say, I don't know what meme to make. Sometimes that happens. Like, sometimes I just have to make one, and so I'm like, you know, it's like I want to put one in the rotation, and I often struggle. But then sometimes it's like, I was seeing a lot of people riff off of Spotify Wraps because 'tis the season. If you're not familiar with this, by the way, if you're not a Spotify user, at the end of the year, Spotify basically shows you like a recap of your year and what you've listened to. And so they often show you like, these are the top artists you listen to, these are the songs you listen to. They'll make you a playlist, but they'll give you some other data too about your genres you listen to or the podcasts you listen to. If you want to know my real Spotify Wrapped, I don't want to tell you. It's usually embarrassing. This year I was not embarrassed. This year I was like, yes, I have taste. But every other year I have had to like put redacted over parts of it because I've just been like, I can't admit this. And but that's okay. You know, this year I wasn't embarrassed. Does anybody like want to know what my Spotify Wrapped was? Probably not, but you know, here we are. I was laughing a little bit to myself because my top artist was Stevie Wonder. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. I do love Stevie Wonder. But I did not think I listened to Stevie Wonder that much. But then I played the playlist it makes for you that's like all your top played songs. And I was like, I listen to a lot of Stevie Wonder. And I'm not mad. So my top artists are Stevie Wonder. Number 2 is Harry Styles. Number 3 is Lil Nas X, which has been on my top 5 many times before. Childish Gambino, who is usually my top number 1. Can't believe he slipped to number 4. And Sam Cooke. And I was like, the bookends of Stevie Wonder and Sam Cooke, and then in the middle being Harry Styles, Lil Nas X, and Childish Gambino is fascinating. My top songs get more chaotic. The top one is My Sherry Amore, which I just don't know. I went through a phase, I guess, in like February where I was really listening to that song. Again, nothing wrong with that being my jam, but like shocking. Second one was Leave Before You Love Me by the Jonas Brothers. I do put that song on repeat one and listen to it for hours. That has happened. When I first heard that song, I played it too many times. Third is Smooth by Santana. And I just like, that song hits, you know? Like, 4 is a Sam Cooke song, Nothing Can Change This Love I Have For You. Again, I know I went through a phase like in February with that song, but like, that's fine. And then 5 is Off the Wall by Michael Jackson. And I'm just like, there's like only one artist, or I guess it's a couple artists, but only like 2 songs that are only one song that's recent. Everything else is like, this could be from like 20 years ago and it would still make sense. So yeah, please feel free to share, if you haven't already answered the question of the day, but if you want to share your most embarrassing Spotify Wrapped this year, I would be happy to know about it, TBH. You can make me feel better. I wish I had like on deck like a couple years ago or last year's, because I know I was embarrassed. I don't remember why, but that scares me. So yeah, you can follow us on Twitter. You can follow us on Instagram. This is my shameless plug. I will go back to me for just a moment so you can see it. This is our Instagram. That's our Twitter. At me on both. You know what I mean? So let's keep it trucking. So now I'm just going to briefly talk a little bit about, I wanted to find you like a modern example, because building and loans don't exist anymore. They changed into savings and loans and now they pretty much don't exist. But I wanted to find you like something kind of similar, but that still existed. And there's a lot of different examples of like housing co-ops, and I just couldn't really think of one that was like, I was like, what's one that like kind of fits with this scenario? And I couldn't really find one. So I'm going to talk like briefly just about a case. But I also want to say that, as far as like organizing movies, and what I'm not about to do is make the argument that It's a Wonderful Life is an organizing movie, because that's not what I'm saying. But I find that there's a lot more, once I started doing organizing work, I saw it in, pop culture media or just like mainstream media more than I expected to. But it's kind of just like not there if you don't know about it. And I was shocked that this movie, which coming from the 40s, I was not expecting something that kind of politically, like, now might be seen as kind of more radical. I was like, wow. And it's just nonchalant in this movie. But like now, like if you tried to propose this as a new idea, you'd get a lot of pushback from people. So that was really interesting to me. But there's a lot of movies like that you find like unexpected like organizing lessons in, which is fascinating. Another good example that I've seen used a lot is Bug's Life. Because in Bug's Life, there's only so many crickets, but there's a lot of ants. And the crickets, I think it's crickets. Locusts? Crickets. They're like, yeah, you're not scared of one ant, but if they all learn that there's 100 of them for every one of us, they would learn that they really overpower us, but we can never let them find that out. I was like, oh, bars. Like I was really like, wow, that's in a kid's movie. That granted, it was a Pixar movie, but that's in a kid's movie. There's also that one scene in SpongeBob. I am so sorry if my pop culture references are leaning very towards my age and demographic. I mean, I like to think I'm counterbalancing it with It's a Wonderful Life, which is pretty inclusive, but I'm so sorry, but there is one scene in SpongeBob where he goes to the Krusty Krab and he's like, I will dismantle this oppressive establishment board by board. I will saw the tables of tyranny in half, not the ankles of big business. I think I just perfectly quoted that. Without having seen it in years. It's just some... Which I love that scene in SpongeBob now, but I remember seeing it more recently and being like, wow, that line is killer. So you start to see it everywhere once you see it. And then obviously there's movies like, more contemporary movies like Sorry to Bother You, which the director or the writer, I'm now blanking on who it is, but he comes from an organizing background. So it's very, and like organizing is a big part of that movie. It's similarly to like, it's like a whole part of the plot. There's a lot to that movie though. I don't necessarily recommend that movie for all ages. But I just want to tell you it exists. Please, discretion is advised when watching that movie. Talk about an ending. Anyway, if you know, you know. So anyway, let's get back to what I was talking about. Thank you for the culture break. So I'm going to talk just briefly about Co-op City, which is in the Bronx in New York. It was founded in 1968. So Co-op City is this huge like cooperative. It's kind of like a city within a city. That's how it kind of got its name and its reputation. So when it opened in 1968, which was at the height of the civil rights movement, 20% of the residents were African American and Latino, in sharp contrast to the segregation that marked most new suburban communities. It has always had kind of a commitment to racial and ethnic integration, though now it doesn't really look quite as diverse as it did back then. But it's kind of like that. Those changes reflect in many ways like the changing demographics of the surrounding borough. But even so, this article I was reading about it from Bloomberg said, the community never really suffered the same sort of racial tensions that scarred so many other New York neighborhoods. So this development's role in shoring up New York City's small store and affordable housing is hard to underestimate. With 15,372 apartments, Co-op City alone contains almost twice as many units as were built under de Blasio's affordable housing plan in 2017. So it's just like huge. It's just huge. So why, you might be saying to yourself, why are there not other developments like this? Why, and I don't have like full complete answers for you about why building and loans, I mean, I did give you a little bit of an answer why building and loans failed, but why we didn't see other creations of housing cooperatives like this. And the truth is we have, there's a lot of reasons why housing cooperatives fail. Oh, there's actually, I have a great book on that. Hang on. Give me 2 seconds. I didn't plan for this, but then I was like, oh, you know what? If you want a pretty good book about why housing cooperatives fail or why they are successful. A book that is basically just a lot of different case studies is called Carving Out the Commons, which is Carving Out the Commons. I don't know if you can hear that. Which is tenant organizing and housing cooperatives specifically in DC. So if you do live in DC, it's really fun to read because you're like, oh my God, I know exactly where that is. You can do like a little tour of it yourself. But if you don't live in DC, it's still really interesting. And I believe I would have to go check a little bit. I believe the author I'm forgetting now. But she basically, I want to say she was like an urban designer. She has kind of a strange profession, but it gives her this, oh, okay. So I'm like, sorry, I'm trying to remember what this book, like, I read it so long ago. So I'm going to read you a little snippet from it just to give you some context. For years, the idea of a commons that might exist in modern times was shaped by ecologist Garrett Hardin's 1968 essay, The Tragedy of the Commons. Hardin argues that human overpopulation, the result of overexploitation of natural resources, leads inevitably to ecological disaster. And so basically people are too individualistic to ever share some kind of a commons. But then she says, but that framework has begun to crack. Since the mid-1980s, two streams of thought have emerged that take the commons seriously. We can refer to these two groups as thinkers as the institutionalists on one hand and the alter-globalizationists on the other. Doris's experience of the commons and the experience of all commoners can be examined from these two different perspectives. Not all work on the commons can be neatly sorted as aligning with one or the other, but overall the gulf between the institutionalists and the alter-globalizationists is striking. These two traditions rarely communicate or even reference each other's work. So she goes a little bit more into these, but she pretty much just is providing a new way of looking at commons, or cooperatives as an example of commons, and figuring out and saying like looking. And what's fascinating is that she really does take it case by case, which I think is necessary because you can't paint them with a broad brush. One thing about housing cooperatives is that they really are tailored to suit that community and those residents. So the reasons that they maybe do or don't succeed are also that specific. So that's a really good book recommendations if you want to read that. What I was talking about though so why aren't there more places like this? There's a lot of reasons, as I said, and you can't paint it with a broad brush. There's one reason is that like there's just not enough land to build huge developments like this anymore. Like, especially if you're not going to engage in urban renewal or just land reclamation. We all saw how those work out. So for that reason, there's just not the physical resource to do that. And then also there's issues with financing options, with existing affordable housing programs, and how they prioritize households. But if you think about it in the context of today, right, in the context of stagnant wages and growing income inequality, housing is increasingly seen as really like a stepping stone to like building sustainable, building wealth, right? And it's really one of the only like assured ways of building that kind of wealth, right? So while Co-op City in particular's limited equity structure is essential for preserving long-term affordability, it also poses significant challenges for residents hoping to move into the private housing market, because when you buy into limited equity co-ops, it doesn't sell. You're not in it investing in it like you would normal real estate, where it's like, I'm going to buy it for $20,000 and in 5 years when I move out, it'll be worth $50,000. And so I will make $20,000 off of that. And for this reason, many residents of a place like Co-op City tend to stay there for a really long time, and there's not a lot of turnover. But in New York's market, right, that's like still a really great option to stay in that apartment, which is inherently more affordable. And what this book actually mentions in that introduction, and now I'm remembering it, I said Doris when I was reading this section of it. there's a lot of testimonies from people who lived in those commons that she analyzes. Amanda Huron is the author, in case you can't see it. Let me go back to me. She tells a lot of stories about people who lived in these different co-ops, and one of the things that one of them mentions is that, yes, I didn't make money by buying into this co-op and then when I eventually left, selling my part of it. But I gained other things from it that could be translated into a monetary value, but weren't necessarily, they weren't monetary at the time, and also they were bigger than that. So one of the things she talks about is, even something like childcare. She said, there were other people in the cooperative who, since I had these relationships with them, because we all worked together, on maintaining this cooperative, they were usually elderly people or retired folks, or other people with children who it's like, they could help provide childcare while I went to work. And so that was something I didn't have to pay for. But I also didn't gain that money back. I didn't necessarily you get what I'm saying? But it was also she talks about the peace of mind though, of knowing I didn't have to worry about childcare, or if I was going to be able to afford childcare, so-and-so from down the hall could watch my kids for me and I could go to work. Or even community gardens, which exist a lot of time, right? You may not save a lot of money on groceries, but you also have easier access to fresh produce, and that might just improve your quality of life. So that testimony in particular, she's like, there was a gain to my quality of life that I would not have had I not been in a co-op. Even if one day I would have gotten all the money back had I been on the housing market, right? Or actually earned that money or profited from selling my property. She felt that, and what this book describes is that's a very common feeling among a lot of people, that the benefits that I got outside of a monetary benefit, I preferred, and I was happy to have. Co-op City, at least in the article I was reading, which was from 2019, was saying buying into the co-op was $20,000. And, that seems like a lot, but then you remember New York. You're like, woo, that's a pretty not a bad deal. But yeah, you're not subject to the market's fluctuation. So when you sell your property, you're not going to make a huge profit off of it. You're really just going to sell it back for what you paid for. So that is really all I have for you today. Kind of a longer one today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope this got you in a festive holiday mood. I know that I am in a festive holiday mood now. Probably gonna watch another Christmas movie this evening, just because now I'm in the mood, and I just watched It's a Wonderful Life, so I'm not gonna watch it again. But yeah, that's all I have. So thank you for watching. As I said before at the beginning, my name is Grace. I'm a digital organizer here at the Redress Movement. If you want to follow the work that we're doing, you can follow us on Instagram. You can follow us on Twitter. We're also on Facebook. This is our email, hello@redressmovement. I can't move my finger that way. This is our email, hello@redressmovement.org. You can email us if you want to get more involved in the work that we're doing. I stream every other Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time until about 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I would be here longer if y'all joined me live. But I will be back in 2 weeks. What is that? Hello? What day is that? The 15th. I will be back the 15th. More fun and exciting things. So please stay in the know for that. And without any further ado, I'm going to get going. Enjoy the rest of your night. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.